Shalom and welcome. This episode will cover Shem. After the global flood, there would have been an ice age and a stone age. The following video will briefly cover these events.
So where does the stone age fit into the Bible? Was there ever a stone age? Well, right after the flood, Noah couldn't tell his grandson to go to the hardware store and get him a shovel. There were no hardware stores. They had a devastated society, folks. They got off the ark and everything outside is destroyed. You have to totally rebuild civilization. They had a Gilligan's Island situation. You got a bunch of smart people. Well, Gilligan's Island did not have a bunch of smart people, maybe one. But they're on this devastated planet. So they're going to have to rebuild from scratch, and you're going to make stone tools. Because that's much quicker than digging the iron ore out, smelting it down, and making an iron tool. By the time it takes you 3 weeks to make your axe, you're going to starve to death, okay? So they're going to make stone tools. And people that are driven out of society are going to travel around in small herds and packs following migrating animals, and they don't want to carry 50 pounds worth of stone tools with them. It's quicker to make your stone tools on the job site. You follow the mammoths until you catch up with them, or the buffalo, and then you quick make your tools, kill the buffalo or the mammoth, and you butcher it and leave your tools behind and go on someplace else. And then we today find these stone tools and say, wow, look at this Clovis point. Wow, perfectly shaped, perfectly balanced. This guy is smart. This is an advanced civilization. And then they find another arrowhead that looks kind of crude, and it's not chipped very smoothly. And they say, wow, this guy's pre-human. You're not quite as smart. Maybe you got the whole wrong perspective on that. Maybe the one that looks kind of crude was found by a guy who's in a bigger hurry because the mammoth is getting away, okay? He just doesn't have time to sit there and play with his arrowhead for an hour. He wants to go shoot the thing now before it runs off. So it might be an example of how much time they have to spend on it. Not at all an example of their intelligence.
So as we can see, after the global flood, there would have been an ice age and a stone age. I have various ages for the earth. 2 old earth ages that place the age of the earth over 100,000 years old. 2 median earth ages that place the age of the earth over 50,000 years old, and 2 young earth ages that place the age of the earth over 20,000 years old. Now for my personal opinion for the age of the earth, I have 3 simple theories for an old earth, median earth, and a young earth. For an old earth, creation was long before 100,000 years ago, and the flood was around 100,000 years ago. Basically, the post-flood event for an old earth was 100,000 years ago, the mass extinction event. For a median earth, creation was long before 20,000 years ago, and the flood was before the last glacial maximum. Basically, the post-flood event for a median earth was 20,000 years ago, the last glacial maximum. For a young earth, creation was long before 12,000 years ago, and the flood was before the young Darius. Basically, the post-flood event for a young earth was 12,000 years ago, the young Darius. But within all of my timelines, these 2 eras remain, the Mesolithic era and the Neolithic era. Therefore, depending on which model people have chosen, I'll begin our journey with Shem and the Mesolithic and the Neolithic, since all of the timelines converge to those eras. With that being said, the Mesolithic and the Neolithic were important time periods for human development. But what was the Mesolithic and the Neolithic? According to History.com, titled The Prehistoric Ages, How Humans Lived Before Written Records, it reads, during the Mesolithic period about 10,000 BCE to 8,000 BCE, humans used small stone tools, now also polished and sometimes crafted with points and attached to antlers, bone, or wood to serve as spears and arrows. They often lived nomadically in camps near rivers and other bodies of water. Agriculture was introduced during this period, which led to more permanent settlements and villages. Finally, during the Neolithic period, roughly 8,000 BCE to 3000 BCE, ancient humans switched from hunter/gatherer mode to agriculture and food production. They domesticated animals and cultivated cereal grain. They used polished hand axes, adzids for plowing and tilling the ground, and started to settle in the plains. Achievements were made not only in tools, but also in farming, home construction, and art, including pottery, sewing, and weaving. The Mesolithic and the Neolithic are important Stone Age periods in human history because during these periods, humans began to develop rapidly. And shortly after the Mesolithic and the Neolithic, we entered the Copper Age and the Bronze Age, which is the beginning and height of ancient civilizations such as Egypt and Africa, Sumer in Mesopotamia, Greece and the Balkans, the Hittites in Anatolia, the Indus Valley Civilization in South Asia, and the Akkadians in Mesopotamia, as well as many other Bronze Age civilizations, all owing their thanks to their ancient ancestors in the Mesolithic and Neolithic era. With that being said, we must ask this important question. What Stone Age population could best represent the earliest descendants of Shem? Basically, what Stone Age population could best represent the ancestors of Semites? Because remember, after the flood, there would have been an Ice Age and a Stone Age. So what ancient people could best represent these descendants of Shem during the Stone Age? The Natufians, pre-Proto-Semites, best represent the Stone Age ancestors of Semites and the Stone Age descendants of Shem after the flood. The Natufians, pre-Proto-Semites, carried Y DNA haplogroup E, which is found abundantly in the ancient Levant, and the Natufians' homeland is the Levant, the same area of pre-Proto-Semites. With that being said, what ancient population descends directly from the Natufians but is still ancestral to Semites? Where did they live, and do they have any cultural elements that reflect ancient Semitic culture? The book titled Early Pastoral Nomadicism and the Settlements of Lower Mesopotamia will perfectly answer this question. It reads, the pre-pottery Neolithic B complex and the Fertile Crescent. The PP&B cultural manifestations appear to solidify and expand on the earlier tenuous steps towards mixed agriculture that perhaps were begun in the late Epipaleolithic and PPNA. Since its definition at Jericho by Kenyon, the sedentary aspect of the PPNB has been found in a large arc covering Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, Syria, and Turkey. Recognizing the pattern, most archaeologists refer to a Levantine origin for this phenomenon. More suggests a concept called the Ancient Levant, which included subsequently all of Syria, western Iraq, most of Jordan, and a portion of northern Saudi Arabia. The researchers at Palmyra refer to PPNB sites there as part of the inland Levant. So here is figure 2, Fertile Crescent in relation to the ancient Levant, and this is where the PPNA and PPNB and PPNC cultures are located, pre-pottery Neolithic, all happening within the ancient Levant. The ancient Levant seems to be an important place for the origins of these ancient people groups. After 4 seasons of excavation at En Ghazel in Jordan, the investigators have subdivided the sequence into 3 specific phases: PPNB 7000 through 6200 BC, PPNC 6200 through 5800 BC, also called Final PPN or PPNB Final, and the PN Neolithic 5800 through 5000 BC, sometimes called Late Neolithic. 3 major topics: climate, subsistence, and lithic technology, which relate to pastoral nomadicism and can be recognized in the archaeological record are briefly examined here in light of the revised PPNB/C record. It seems clear that the PPNB/C was part of a climactic optimum that declined slowly and terminated in stages during the late 3rd millennium BC. Melart speaks of a wetter phase during the early part of that period, which allowed the spread of PPNB culture into more marginal steppe sites such as Bulaucrus and Kowloon. Moore has postulated a major shift in vegetation zones between the beginning of the Natufian and the end of the PPNB. Others have suggested that the climate of southern Palestine was wetter during the 7th millennium BC. Economically, according to Bar Yosef, a radical change took place by the beginning of the period. Without clearly stating that the PPNB animals were domesticated, he suggests that a dramatic funnel change was evident at such sites as Miribet, Abu Halira, Bezamun, Jericho, and Abu Ghosh. The evidence of sheep remains at Jericho, found outside their natural habitat, also suggests a concerted conscious manipulation. A study of the fauna at Jericho convinced Clutton Brock that domesticated goat and sheep were present by the 8th millennium BC. Moore states that ovicoprids and gazelle were herded by the PPNB. Moore later proposed that only ovicoprids were herded and that the innovation began during the PPNB. Ovicoprids, by the way, are domestic sheep and goats taken together. The earlier levels at Tel Aswad contained a majority of wild animals, but the PPNC domestic ovicoprids were dominant. At Bualcras, contemporary to the last half of the PPNB at Abu Hurira, and thus part of the PPNC, the initial faunal identification suggests that ovicoprid remains predominated and that goat were semi-domesticated. At An-Ghazel during the PPNB, herding domesticated goats and hunting were equally important. In PPNC, goats were increasingly well represented and hunting declined. The distribution of animal domesticates in the Levant, coupled with other evidence, suggests that the hearth area for much of PPNB animal husbandry may have been in the northern Syrian region just north of Jezreel. The spread of PPNC culture over the desert/steppe suggests the continuation of a mixed subsistence strategy, but one that also included some limited sheep/goat herding. In summary, by 6200 BC, a recognizable PPNC culture had begun to penetrate the more marginal environments of the Near East, both south into the Negev and Sinai, and east of the Levant into Jordan and Saudi Arabia. In each succeeding period, the growing reliance on domestic herd at the expense of farming and hunting and gathering can be documented, thus demonstrating the gradual but inexorable shift to specialized pastoralism. The PPNB PN steppe/desert cultures of Syria and Iraq. The above discussion can provide a basis for examining similar materials from the Jezreel steppe of Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, and the deserts of southeast Syria and western Iraq. Subsistence patterns clearly define a mixed farming/hunting-gathering strategy, and the lithics are in the larger Levantine PPNB/C tradition. Several sites in the Jezreel were located on the frontiers of the rainfall farming. The influence from the Levantine tradition may extend even to Hassuna. Clayson again found an abundance of domesticated sheep, goats, and cattle, and concluded that plant cultivation was of little importance. Examination of those sites of the Jezreel suggests that the steppe environment was marginal for farming, but excellent for expanding herds. To summarize, PPNB populations began to expand into areas of the Near East, often considered marginal to the Fertile Crescent. That expansion has been well documented in the Negev and Sinai, eastern Jordan and at Qawm in Syria, where surveys and limited excavations have established some chronological reliability, artifact context, and relevant fauna and flora particulars. A number of points suggest a close interaction between those steppe and desert sites and the Levantine region itself. Origins of pastoralism. Anthropologists have long debated the definition of pastoral nomadicism. Several recent syntheses have suggested that all pastoral nomads share certain characteristics such as strong legalized kinship and lineage bonds, impermanent dwellings, movement to procure pasturage and water for herds, and specific relationships to formal states. Thus, pastoral nomadicism seems to stress animal husbandry along patterned migration routes exploiting marginal environments. Developmental models studying pastoral nomadicism have largely focused on historical record, largely because researchers have concluded that a close symbiotic relationship exists between the urban settled peoples and the nomadic peoples. The evidence, however, points toward a new interpretation. Pastoral nomadicism began by the end of the 7th millennium BC as populations began to utilize the discovery of animal husbandry in a new and dramatic way. The process can be seen as a third-tier step. First, based on faunal material found in the Fertile Crescent, we can conclude that domestic ovicoprids and cattle were present as early as the mid-7th millennium BC. Second, within the steppe region, as exemplified by the Jezreel site in Qawm, herding was emphasized. That suggestion is based on the location of the sites in a very low rainfall area, and the apparent domination of animals over plants in the economy. Third, if domestic animals were known to the inhabitants of the Fertile Crescent and the steppe, and the desert sites are chronologically contemporaneous or interrelated, the latter may represent early pastoral nomads who still exercised a broad spectrum approach for subsistence. The picture of faunal reversal beginning at the PPNC supports these conclusions, as the faunal curves at Abu Huraira and elsewhere suggest a reliance on wild gazelle was almost totally replaced by one on domesticated ovicoprids. Two other arguments can buttress the suggestions here. First, the substantial increase in the site numbers and the site sizes in the late PPNB in the desert and steppe seems strongly related to complex interactions between the nomads and the settled populations. Animal domestication may be one variable responsible for that increase. Indeed, the N-Gazelle, Jericho, Kilwa, Nahal, Himar link would argue for close interaction of the type suggested from the ethnographic record. Second, the appearance of numerous sites in western Iraq along watercourses that today are dry indicates both climatic amelioration during the PPNB and the ability of a new way of life to sustain human existence in the region. It appears that the late Upper and Epi-Paleolithic populations in western Iraq and southern Syria largely abandoned the steppe and the desert. Therefore, the PPNB/C sites represent the initial resettlement that pastoral nomadicism made possible. Prehistoric Akkad. The sudden appearance of populations without any previous occupational history in the desert and steppe raises the question of ethnic and linguistic identity. The Semitic populations identified as Akkadians were pastoral groups who migrated from the western desert or Hamada sometime within a proto-historic Mesopotamian context. No available historical data clarify their condition in the late 4th and early 3rd millennium BC, although some possible contemporary sites have been identified in the desert. The prehistoric occupation pattern, like that of historical time, suggests a strong pastoral Semitic presence interacting with the settled population. The idea that Amorites, Arameans, and Arabs were essentially pastoral nomadic Semitic people who invaded the plain has been largely accepted, perhaps based on the historical data extent for those populations. The crux of the matter in historical terms centers on the Akkadians. The conclusion here is that the title King of Kish, used by rulers by the early dynastic 1 through 2 period, referred to political supremacy over the northern part of the plain, circa 2900 through 2500 BC, a period when Semitic writing was beginning to be recognized as a state instrument for political domination. Since Semitic populations exercise that control, they exert political and socio-economic power not only south into Sumer, but also apparently north along the Euphrates to Mari and beyond. A cultural symbiosis was characteristic of the region, and the early Semitic populations penetrated Mesopotamia through the middle Euphrates Valley. They spread to the region of Kish, Sipra, and Mari, and moved sporadically south.
So as we just read, pre-pottery Neolithic A, B, and C cultures descend from Natufians, and these Neolithic cultures were located in the Levant. They were the earliest pastoralists and the first to domesticate sheep and goats. These PP&A, PP&B, and PP&C cultures are also ancestral to Semites. In terms of culture, pastoralism started by Neolithic Levantines. And when you study Semitic culture, you realize that pastoralism was an important element among early Semitic populations. The earliest chapters of Genesis even identifies pastoralism with Semites, such as the patriarchs. According to the book titled Animals and Human Society, it reads, pastoralism featured in the Old Testament of the Bible, with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob being nomadic pastoralists. And according to the article titled The Pastoral Lifestyle of Abraham and His Family, it reads, anthropological studies of this period and region suggest the families in these narratives practice a mixed semi-nomadic pastoralism and herdsman husbandry. Because a family could not be entirely supported through shepherd herding, it was necessary to practice local agriculture and trade with those living in more settled communities. Pastoralism cared for sheep and goats to obtain milk and meat, wool and other goods made from animal products such as leather. Donkeys carried loads, and camels were especially suited for long-range travel. The patriarchal narratives repeatedly mention the great wealth of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Shepherd herding and animal husbandry were honorable fields of work and could be lucrative, and Abraham's family became very wealthy. With that being said, what is the Y-DNA chromosomal haplogroup of pre-pottery Neolithic Levantines, the first pastoralists and agriculturalists who are the ancestors of Semites? According to the paper titled Ancient DNA from Chalcolithic Israel, reveals the role of population mixture in cultural transformation. It reads, this finding contrasts with both earlier Neolithic and Epi-Paleolithic Levantine populations, which were dominated by haplogroup E. And according to the paper titled Y Chromosome Diversity Characterizes the Gulf of Oman, it reads, the role of the Levant in the Neolithic dispersal of the E3B1-M35 sublineages is supported by the data. And according to the paper titled Y chromosome E haplogroups, their distribution and implication to the origins of Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralism, it reads, the Proto-Afro-Asiatic group carrying the E-P2 mutation may have appeared at this point in time and subsequently gave rise to the different major population groups, including current speakers of the Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralist populations. So Neolithic Levantine populations were dominated by haplogroup E, and haplogroup E expanded from the Levant. Furthermore, Proto-Afro-Asiatic populations and pastoralist populations are connected to haplogroup E. These pre-pottery Neolithic Levantines and Proto-Afro-Asiatic populations and early pastoralist populations are likely all the ancestors of early Semitic populations.